to launch today. I am so excited. I can barely contain myself. And Viola, I'd like you to start and share the power of music in well, share who you are.
Okay.
Who you are and the power of music that in your profession and in your life.
Okay, I would love to do that. Well, first of all, thank you, Karen, for having me. It's such a joy because I think the last time you and I were on Zoom/Facebook, I was interviewing you. So, so this is a wonderful opportunity to share just a little bit, just to encourage moms and dads, grandma, grandpa, family, about the power of music in relationship to memory. So let me just share a little bit about my background. I am currently a transformational coach for millennial leaders, primarily helping them discover their identity, purpose, and calling, and getting traction to take action in their lives and put their new discoveries into real-time strategies that help them move forward in the things that they're called to do. But I also coach coaches. And so Karen and I are peer coaches. So we coach each other in our perspective fields. And previously, I was doing some English teaching online to students in China. And I absolutely just am so thankful for Karen because of her years of expertise, wisdom, knowledge, insight, understanding, love for kids. The thing that I love about you most, Karen, is that there is no child that cannot learn in your mind, and you herald that. And you really are a forerunner and a trailblazer in that regard, and a movement maker, really. And I'm just so excited because there's such a shift in education and how we deliver education to our children in this hour, which is it's wonderful because it's like every COVID pandemic shook up everything that could be shaken, but it's shaking in our favor because it opens the door for this golden opportunity to be able for people like yourself that have already been operating in reformed education for decades to really come to the forefront and to spread that across the globe. I mean, and that nothing is more exciting to my heart in the area of education that children would actually have the opportunity that they deserve to learn. Imagine that. Like, go figure. I'm so excited, and it's unstoppable because now with the internet and people doing these challenges and Zoom calls, and I mean, like, no, they can't stop it. And so I'm so excited. I'm just and I'm so happy for our kids because, yeah. So I'll get off of that soapbox and jump on to my other soapbox, which is about music. So my background is in education. I have a master's in curriculum and instruction and primarily taught foreign language, Spanish specifically at the elementary level, kindergarten through 5th grade. And then I did ESL, which was primarily 5-year-olds to 14-year-olds was the highest, but mostly 5 to 10. I had one 4-year-old that was a genius, but otherwise, I'm like, who are you, child? But yeah, and so I love what this is all about, music. And I'm not a musician per se, but I learned enough of music as growing up as a child. I had like 8 years of piano lessons, so I can carry a tune, I can play a tune, but I did develop a deep appreciation for music, and I understand the power of music. And I don't have all the language, the scientific language. I just know in my heart that it's powerful. And it's universal, and it bypasses cultures, it bypasses language barriers. It bypasses all the things, and it's just a unifier. And so bringing that into my classroom, I got to experience the power of that, and specifically highlighting like in the area, and I used it actually in English teaching as well, but especially in my Spanish classroom with my kindergartners through fifth graders. It was just amazing what they could learn. And I'm sure you've all met that adult. You might even, those of you that are listening, might be that adult that I will meet in the grocery store, and they would say, oh, what do you do? And I say, I'm a Spanish teacher. And they say, oh, I always wanted to learn Spanish, but I just never could. It was so hard. And I say, well, that's because you didn't have me as a teacher. And when I say that, I say it in humility, but the truth is, because I used music and movement and all those things, I didn't really encounter kids that could not learn Spanish in my classroom. And when I would get together with other Spanish teachers in the district, sometimes they had, complaints and struggles about kids not being able to do this and that and the other thing. And I'm just like, try a song. So some of you, this may be aging out here, but just if you recognize this, raise your hand, your virtual hand, even if you're watching by replay. So conjunction, junction, what's your function? Hooking up words and clauses and phrases. Anybody remember that? Okay. Now, I was not the sharpest crayon in the box in school, mainly because of a lot of reasons, right? I am very smart, but in school, you wouldn't have known that. But when I discovered Schoolhouse Rock, I remember even as a child going, okay, why hasn't anybody taught? I almost felt like I found the cheat sheet or something. And if it weren't for Schoolhouse Rock, I probably still wouldn't know my multiplication tables to this day. But I found that channel, and I would come home after school or on Saturday mornings, whatever it was, and I would turn that thing on. And I was so excited because I was like, oh, this is like the cheat sheet. I can finally learn my multiplication tables. And there was one that said, 1 times 8 is 2 times 4. 4 times 4 is 2 times 8. And it was all about this figure 8. And here I am, 58 years old almost, and I still ingrained for life. Can't forget those songs if I wanted to. That is really the power of music. In my Spanish classroom, same thing. I mean, and I know, I think, was it Daniel yesterday that was talking about rap and the power of rap. And I can't tell you how many people don't like rap, but let me tell you, we would rap all of the South America. I had a rap for all the South American countries. I guarantee you not one of my 4th graders didn't know every single country in South America. And I guarantee you they're probably like in their 20s now, and they still know those countries. Some of them probably won a geography contest because of that song, And so it's just so powerful. Yeah, it's just a powerful tool for memory, and rap, song, rhythm, movement, dance, and especially the kids that can't sit still in the chair. It gives them the reason, the excuse to be able to, like they actually have permission to get up and move and groove to the songs, and they love it. And then I would sometimes have playground duty or lunchroom duty, and you catch these kids singing the songs like off, outside of classroom time. And they love it. And it really is amazing how it tunes their ear. It creates a wonderful pronunciation at an early age. And I'm not boasting in myself, but my kids sounded really good. And I was really proud of their pronunciation, because I was a stickler for pronunciation, because I did not want them to have a gringo accent at all. So I was really like, oh, we got to pronounce this correctly. And they did. And music was the power behind that, like 9 times out of 10. And so then the kids walk away with this confidence, that they can do it. And the beautiful thing about it, and like I said, memory, it just goes without saying, it sticks with them. But the confidence that it gives them too is also really, really powerful, because once they accomplish singing even just one song by themselves on their own, like how it just makes them feel so accomplished and achieved. And then you're the brain person, Karen, so you know how it opens up all the pathways in the brain. It's like my son's first touchdown in football. Now the brain remembers how to do that again. And so then it's a win from there. And so I can't say enough about it. For myself, it's been really powerful. I know just even recently, like some scripture memorization that I did, like I created my own songs in some difficult, challenging times. And then it's funny how, years ago, I'm talking years ago, and then suddenly, not having thought about that song like in 10, 12 years, but I hit this place where I'm being emotionally challenged in a particular way. And that song just rose up out of me, and it was just right there. And I'm like, wow, that was really, and it was just right on time. And I mean, literally hadn't thought about it for years. So
Thank you so much for sharing. I thought about this girl when you were sharing that she had some emotional issues, divorce, and maybe some neglect and abuse, and then she had some memory issues, and then she ended up having some really serious health issues that that came shortly after that. But what she looked like was she was laid out on the floor listening to Schoolhouse Rock.
yeah.
With an attitude, and teenager. And I'm like, so I just, you don't know. And so I just kind of put it this little, I was mad, but it came out like as a little challenge. I'm like, well, hey, I was like, all right, you can lay there and you can be you. But do you have this song memorized? And it was one of the multiplication songs that didn't have the facts memorized in it. It was more of a story, and it had a lot of words. And so I've never memorized all of the words, but it was like one of my favorites. And she's like, well, then I had her attention. She's like, well, let me listen one more time. So she's laying on the ground. Now I know that at least she's tuned in. So twice, she listened to the song twice, stood up and sang every single word in pitch, in tune, and had her multiplication facts memorized.
Ta-da!
Yep. And so that, just the emotional, the memory, the illness, it just broke through all of that.
All of that. Yeah, it's powerful. It's just powerful.
Can you, I'm going to put you on the spot, but was there a difference in your boys after, the difference between listening to music and when they started playing?
Yeah, I think, we did a family guitar lesson. We all got to take guitar lessons. That was their first introduction. Of course, in school they had, the music classes, but officially, yeah, we did. And they just loved it. And I know that it just opened something new up inside of them. And especially boys sometimes aren't the most expressive. Everybody's different, but mine, let's just say mine, sometimes and also the effects of divorce, can really shut down the emotions in them. And when we did the guitar lessons, that was really a moment where I just saw something reconnect, you know, in there at a heart level. And then Carlo went on and did the cello, and he eventually left it behind, but his appreciation for the music to this day is just off the charts. And I remember we got to go, it was a dream of his to hear Yo-Yo Ma in person, and it came true. He came to Kansas City to that beautiful Kaufman, I forget what the place is called, where the symphony plays at the Kaufman, and we got tickets somehow to his master class, and then he had like a rehearsal. I know. They're like, this is like Yo-Yo Ma. And it was just amazing. And so, yeah, I think it, you know, who's to say, but I think it definitely massaged their hearts in a way that only music can, you know. I don't have the words to really articulate that, and I definitely don't know the research behind it, but I could just see that it was definitely a blessing. Oh, can't hear you though. You're on mute. There you
Just
go.
from the outside in, it just seems like the playing a string, playing piano, like there just comes with it this higher level of intelligence, and they actually carry themselves differently. I always liked the way that your sons carried themselves. It's like they knew who they were. There was something that was connected in them. And I associated that, especially Carla, with you know, playing, and to me, you know, not playing anything except for my 3 chords on my guitar, you know, that he seemed like he was at a much higher level, you know, of it, you know. And I don't know, you know, I was kind of surprised that it didn't continue, but he's also in a creative field. Who knows if that didn't open up,
I'm
you know,
sure.
all that creativity and that genius.
I'm sure it did. And he's very drawn. I mean, he's beyond a music lover. He's like a music consumer. And, you know, he just consumes it. And to this day, and he's drawn to things like dance and other things, you know, he's just really open to that whole creative world. So and Giamo has pursued foreign language, which, by the way, there is a connection in the brain between the ability to learn music and the ability to learn foreign language and math and some of the other things. So there's that too.
Well, yay, thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure I see him taking notes. She's going to explain all the brain stuff to us. But Sasha, am I saying it right? Sasha Leah? So I invited her on and just to tell a little bit of your story, and it matches more. So Viola, you just did a perfect segue from yesterday, and Daniel in. We spent a lot of time yesterday talking about returning to joy, learning in joy, and returning to joy. And I invited Sasha Leah in to tell a little bit of her story, whatever she's comfortable with, but the power of music and dance in kind of you know, coming out of a place that maybe was not as easy, and being able to return to joy. Would you mind sharing?
Yeah, sure. Actually, that's a very good thing to even mention music, to be honest, because I do have a very good connection with the music. I actually did 7 years of piano school, and I was kind of like, I was seen by my mother that I am supposed to be a music person. Only I cannot really say that playing piano was my biggest passion, because I always wanted to sing. I was super good with playing piano. I was always in like top list in my school everywhere, and just sent like really outperforming the programs that they would give to me. However, I felt like I want to sing, I want to sing, I want to sing. And then what did happen eventually when I grew up, I kind of stopped playing piano at all, but I ended up singing. And I think the first time when I secretly said, okay, yes to this thing, to start singing, was an encouragement of my ex-boyfriend, who happened to be a very passionate person about music overall. Right now, he is a worship leader in the big international church in Kiev, and his passion kind of encouraged me to step into that calling, which later on I realized was very much connected, even with the fact of me dancing, because I probably wouldn't come to that point of dancing if I wouldn't be there starting with singing at first place. So singing was something very special to me, because I always felt like I want to tell the stories, and the music gives us that great permission to actually step into the shoes of maybe some other story of somebody, right? When we're trying to do the cover of somebody's song, or even find a song that would reflect ourselves from the inside out, what is inside of our hearts, what connects with us the most. And I was always this type of a kid that would have like very poor emotional intelligence. I was not raised up in that environment where, people make you feel secure, loved, and this kind of stuff. So for me to express my emotions was a very, very, very tough deal. And I found out that when I was singing, when I was developing that ability to tell my story through the song, it was really helping me to step into that ground of freedom where I could be myself. And that was amazing. I felt it so, I don't know. I just felt like it was me. It was a part of me that was sleeping inside, and I just had to discover that part. And along with that journey, I already became a Christian, and I realized that actually singing is a part of worshiping. And David was the man in the Bible who was singing. And then later I discovered that he was dancing as well. So it was something they didn't tell me in the Baptist church right away. And I never paid attention to that unless I started to study the Bible and just learn those things on my own. And so aside of that part of me stepping into freedom and becoming who I am, when I sing and tell that story, I started to realize this connection with David and the gift of a worshiper, and then the heart of a worshiper. And I actually started to see David as like a very special personality that connects to me the most, probably like aside of Queen Esther and Joseph, like David is the other person who is like very much like me. And when I was trying to, because I had a season when God said, I want you to go into the book of Psalms and go through it very attentively, trying to understand what it was to be a man after the God's heart, what it was to be like David, what it was to have that heart of a worshiper. And it's been quite a season. I don't know how long it lasted actually, but it was quite a season when I was just trying to investigate and go deeper into this Psalms, the book of Psalms, and asking all these questions about who David was and what it means to be after God's heart and all these kind of questions. And this led me parallelly somehow in that season, it led me into that momentum where that anointment of joy came to me. And with joy, there is a funny part, I might say. I might say that I had something when I was changing my documents when I was an adult, and I wanted to add the middle name. And in Ukraine, we don't have the middle names, but I always felt like my middle name should be Joy. And when I was changing my documents, I spoke to that officer and I said, you know what, I want to have the middle name. And they said, no, you cannot, because in our Ukrainian passports, we don't have this slot where you can put this middle name. Instead, we have the father's name, which is it doesn't make any sense to me. Why do we have the father's name and we cannot have the middle name? But the funny part is that They didn't let me do that. And I remember how I was so much upset. I was so much upset. But God is so gracious, and he's so much into the details, and he is so creative, and his creativity is so crazy huge, because when I ended up in Hawaii, and it's been in 2017, and I knew that when I came there on that trip, and I was doing a school there, and I was staying for about like half a year, and it was a Christian school. So God spent a lot of time with me there, just having that retreat and that personal momentum one-on-one with him. And I was drawn to the worship and prayer room that they had there. So I was standing in that prayer room, and I was trying to hear and like see what God is telling me. God was doing something. I definitely knew that, because one day, after a week of like him trying to clean my spirit and just take away all the trauma of my childhood and all the dark moments and this kind of stuff, I started to dance like crazy. And I just knew that from the spiritual realm, it was the day when some spirit of joy just fell over me. It just fell so strongly and so thick. I never danced like that before. It was like a glory that was radiating from inside out. And if the friends of mine, my Korean friends there, they came to me after that night, and they're like, Shlia, what did happen with you during that week? Because something did happen. You look very different. Like, I don't know what did happen, but I know one thing. The crazy joy came to me, and I started to dance. And it's been like years after the situation with my name that I wanted to change. And I must say that I started to dance since then, but I was dancing just behind my closed door. And dancing part was like the singing part for me, because through dancing, I was telling the story. It's like with singing, I could express it in my words. But then I realized there were the layers of my soul, which I could not put in the words. They were so much deeper. They were so much hidden. They were so much just like very, very intimate and very, very inner heart of myself. And I could not put them in the words, because I mean, by that time I already started to write my own songs. So I have a lot of like drafts of my own songs, and I already started to do the vocal classes as well. And I was singing. I really was like developing that talent of mine. But at the same time, when I started to dance behind the closed door, I realized that it was this inner hidden joy of a child showing up in front of the Papa, and also in front of Jesus later, because he led me deeper into that. From that experience in Hawaii, that was the experience where I started to dance like a little kid. I was dancing with Papa, but then he led me into like growing, developing into that bride, and now dancing with Jesus as a bride, not only as a kid, as I used to do that with Papa, right? And then I started to realize that by telling me that story, it's like the Holy Spirit started to show me visions and other things just happening out there. They were just in my room, and it was like I could not even explain. And just on that, at that season of my life, because it's been before the war happened, somewhat like during the past year, but before the war happened, and a friend of mine, she reaches out to me, and she's like, so Shalia, do you know, I just saw something very funny, and I thought about you, like, do you know what your name means in Hawaiian language? And I'm like, wait a second, okay, like, like I feel like God was talking with me about that just somewhat like couple days prior to that. And the fact that she contacted me was such a huge confirmation, because my name is two names in one. It's Sasha and Leah, which is like Sasha is one separate part, Leah is the second separate part, but altogether it's one name, which is Sasha Leah. And I realized that in Hawaiian language, Leah means joy. And I was like, Lord, you just did something amazing. You sent me across the world from Ukraine to Hawaii so that you could just pour out that spirit of joy over me. and also take away that disappointment out of my heart, because once I wanted to put that joy thing as my middle name, and they did not allow me to do that. And I always thought like, okay, maybe one day when I would live abroad, and abroad they do have this middle name, I will still try to put it in there. But nowadays I realized I don't even need to put it in there anymore, because God is so much into that creativity, into the details, into telling our personal stories through our names, even through the songs, through us dancing, through like any other type of art that we can actually use to connect with him, to connect with this world and tell our story, that I ended up literally carrying not just the spirit of joy over me, but also having that joy in my name. And I was not even aware about that. And I was like, Lord, this is amazing. This is just brilliant, just brilliant. So I don't know if that really answers your questions. And like, if you have any questions along the journey, you can actually ask them so that I would know how to navigate and finish my story. But that's pretty much what I wanted to share. Oh, Karen, I don't hear you because you're mute.
We've got 2 minutes before Hemda speaks, but I wanted to I saw a post that you did where you were like dancing for freedom and dancing for joy in was it an art museum? It was like a public place, and you were just like a little child and just free. And I know that you have seen and heard some horrible things, coming from the war, and it was just so. Can you explain, can you share with us that?
Okay, that story was actually very funny. I felt it in my spirit, like God was telling me, you have to go to the somewhere to the art gallery. And I was like, okay, we will go to the art gallery, but I don't know when and how and all this kind of stuff. And then a friend of mine reaches out to me and says like, you know what? I felt like God was telling us to go to this Miami district with this like art district, or how it's called, I don't know. And without understanding where we're going and all, like what she has in mind, I just said yes, because I had that in my spirits already. And so on that specific day, we go there and she takes us to that graffiti museum. She's like, maybe we should go and see the graffiti museum. I don't know even like why. And I'm not into graffiti. I have no clue about graffiti. I'm like very far away from graffiti. I'm more into like classical art and this kind of stuff, like definitely not the graffiti part. But we go in there because I feel like my heart is telling me just go in there. And so we go in there, and in one particular room, when I enter into that room, I feel such a heavy spirit that is like obviously not from God. But I feel like God is showing me that I am supposed to dance there. And then the friend of mine says, you know what? It's so interesting. Should you ask the Lord, maybe he wants you to return, like come back to that place once again later, because I just saw a very short glimpse, like a vision that you and another man, you both are dancing here together. And I'm like, I know what you're talking about. It's me and Jesus dancing here in that place. So I took off my shoes and I'm like, I hope they're not going to kick us out from that place. And I just started to dance without even understanding what this whole thing, like what this art collection represented. But then once I was dancing, I felt like the spirit of joy came over me, a very strong one. And I heard as the Lord was saying, I am going to bring the life through the colors. That was one of the messages. And the other thing that he said, I want you to have a party, like dance as if it's a party, dance with such a joy, just like partying here for the glory of the Lord. And I was dancing. By the end of this whole experience, I was dancing just like as if it's like a complete party out there, just partying, just having my party. And you won't believe me, but I stopped dancing, I finished dancing. I normally, when I dance, I can feel like when I'm done with my mission right now. So I felt like, okay, I'm done with my mission right now. And I lift up my eyes and I look at the wall, and the wall is saying that the name of the artist is Ghost. However, I mean, not this like Holy Ghost, but like Ghost. And then on that wall, he speaks about like the best compliment that I have is when people look at my art and they start experience hallucinations and just like, you know, all this kind of like stuff without taking drugs. And these pictures on the walls were really crazy. They looked kind of very crazy. And what I felt initially when we entered in there is that it was the demonic presence, which will cause people to lose their like godly given dreams. So I just felt like this yoke has to be broken right there. It's not good, because now everybody who is entering into that room, they're going to catch that spirit of God and the dreams of God to come to them during their night experience and not seeing all this mess that they just saw here, you know, without taking drugs. And somehow I literally had this like very short glimpse, like a vision, like, you know, and I saw as the word was written on a word on a wall, and next to the ghost part, it was like big letters, ghost part, it was now Holy Ghost. And I was literally, I was like, I mean, it was not visual on the wall, but it's like as if somebody wrote it in the spiritual realm out there. And I felt like Lord is turning the tables here. Like he is doing something. He is going to produce a fruit just out of the dance, because that dance just shake the ground and shake the atmosphere, and something happened. Some yoke was broken, and I don't know, we danced and then we laughed, but it was just funny. And I also could not believe, because it was my very first time experience dancing in public at all. But when I was in Ukraine, and I remember I was talking to one person, and she used to dance in the public places. And I just heard it in the spirit. I saw it as a vision, and I heard it as a confirmation in my spirit that God was saying, Sashalia, you are meant to dance in the public places. And I'm like, I'm not even a dancer. I'm not a professional dancer, at least. Like, how am I supposed to dance in the public places? But God brought me in a public place without me understanding why are we going to this gallery, art gallery, why it's in my spirit. But there was a mission out there. So I was on the mission field. So it was just a funny thing. And I believe that
Thank
actually all
you.
this creativity that God can put inside of us, whether that's singing a song, telling stories through the song, sharing the message through the dance, maybe it's painting, maybe it's some other type of art,
Yes.
pottery, whatever it might be. God is so creative, and he just expresses himself, expresses his joy, his power, his healing, his peace through any piece of art.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're
And
welcome.
you can go ahead and mute yourself. And Hamda, you have a lot of on-ramps in her story to jump into what's happening in the brain, and with the creativity. I'm going to share your first slide. Let's get back out here. And here we go. That was yesterday. And we talked a lot about joy yesterday. And here is the beautiful Hamda. Can you give an introduction of who you are, and your credentials and your experience, and then just let me know when to turn the slide to your first slide.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, so I have a bachelor's of music education, and I also have my master's of music and performance with a focus in piano and also teaching piano. And I have my national certification as a teacher of music from Music Teachers National Association. I've been teaching piano for over 38 years, and I have taught a lot of students on the autism spectrum, and they have just won a special place in my heart, because I struggled as a child with horrible emotional eruptions. I was always having meltdowns. I couldn't handle my big emotions, and I would get very angry with myself when I would make mistakes at the piano and not be able to process it like I thought I should. And I would get so angry that I would actually hit myself. And I would pound my thighs really, really hard until they stung and turned red. And fortunately, I was not skinny, so that was probably okay. But, I don't know what my mom did to help me get through all of that, but I thought at some point when I was in high school that I would be really good at teaching students who struggled like I did. And I found that I was very empathetic, but I also found that when I started teaching students who struggled with things I'd struggled with, that I needed a lot more education and knowledge. So I became really passionate about research and studying how I could help my students, because I had students who did try to self-harm in actually scarier ways than what I did. And so through the years, I found things that have worked, and I continue to work with students in a private one-on-one teaching piano. But I'm also now expanding to working with parents and teachers to help them with their children and their students who are on the autism spectrum as well as ADHD, because there's some overlap there. And I'm just really, really passionate about helping more children by helping parents and teachers and sharing what I've learned through the years. And I've developed a program of mindfulness and modeling and movements and musicality. But what I'm going to talk about right now is how music affects the brain. So I want to look at our first slide, which is, I just think this is fascinating. Brain waves are, as far as I understand, are those electrical pulse impulses or pulses that are communicated between masses of neurons in our brain. And so you can see the picture on the left is before listening to music. And this shows anxious and agitated and confused brain and confused brain waves. And then after listening for 15 minutes, so these are calm, confident, and relaxed brain waves. And from what my research has shown, music really stimulates the alpha and the theta waves, as well as the beta waves. But particularly with the alpha waves, you get the creativity and the power of being in the moment. And then with the theta waves, those happen like in sleep, but also in deep meditation, and can unlock learning and memory and intuition. And then, of course, when we're more in a conscious, awake state, we're more in using those beta waves, and we're really working on cognition and, cognitive things in the outer world. So we can go to the next slide. Karen was really wanting me to share with you, because I was telling her I had this picture. I've seen pictures. This isn't the best one I've found. I can't find the one I really, really like. But this is an MRI of a brain at rest on the left, and then on the right, the brain's reaction to music. And I don't know if you can see can you see my cursor?
No,
No.
I have
Okay.
I have to share. Let me share the mouse with you.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Now you can see it?
No, I'm going to give you a spotlight. Okay. So there,
Ah. What do I do with that?
point to where you want to go.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So these areas here, you can see how much more lit the brain is after in its reaction to music. And the red areas, as I understand, is increased blood flow. But there's just so much more activity going on here just from listening to music. So music really lights up the brain. And let's go to the next slide, because then we're going to look at really specific places that music lights up the brain. So starting, let's start here with the corpus callosum. It's I don't know why it's my favorite, but it's the tissue that connects both hemispheres of the brain. And I think this is my favorite because they found in the brains of people on the autism spectrum that there is less tissue in the corpus callosum. And there's a larger area in the hippocampus, which is involved in memories. But what I do with these movements that I use, I found these cross-body movements that I use that help my autism spectrum students, they actually build more neural pathways in the corpus callosum. And then music also affects the motor cortex, which is involved in movement and while playing an instrument or in dancing. And the prefrontal cortex controls behavior and expression and decision making. And I love these little faces here. Karen, you're going to have to help me with this. How to pronounce, is this accumbens? I don't know how to pronounce that. Do you know how to pronounce that?
No, I do not know how to pronounce it, but I'm going with yours, ATAP-EDU'S.
Okay, and the amygdala, both of those are in the limbic brain, and they are involved with the emotional reactions to music. And part of the limbic brain, well, the limbic brain doesn't, as I understand, doesn't have any language, which is interesting. This is often where we can have spiritual experiences as well as reactions, emotional, deep reactions to music that we have trouble putting into words, but they are very real. And then the music also activates the cerebellum, and which is kind of they call it cerebellum as I guess a Latin derivation is the little brain. Is that right? Anyway, this is down here by the brain stem, and it's involved in movement while dancing or playing an instrument, as well as emotional reactions. Music also activates the visual cortex, and that's involved in reading music or looking at your own dance moves. And then the hippocampus, which I mentioned, tends to be larger in people who are on the autism spectrum, and that's involved in forming and making memories, and the context of those memories. And then auditory cortex is also affected, obviously, with music and by listening to sounds and perceiving and analyzing tones. And the sensory cortex with tactile feedback and while playing an instrument or dancing, and also with all the muscles and the joints and the sense of gravity and the sense of your position of your body in space. All of that is activated by music. And then our next slide, I like this one because we're focusing a lot on children, and Karen, I just really loved our conversation a week ago Sunday. And I love your approach with children because I feel that same way, that every single child has this amazing potential, and it's our job to figure out how to unlock that and to open that up. And I love working with children on the spectrum, autism spectrum, because they look at things in a different way, and there may be different things that we need to do to help them kind of bring that brain cohesion. But music helps with children with rewards and healing powers. Music stimulates the rewards area in the brain that improves self-esteem, and listening to music decreases anxiety and pain in kids. When you have children that have meltdowns, music is really helpful for them, even in the meltdowns with learning the music, which I had.
Oops, sorry.
That's all right. And then music also increases focus and boosts memory, as I showed you about with the hippocampus, and that kids hear or study music have better focus and better memory and better grasping power because of the fact it also affects the sensory cortex and the motor cortex. And they also perform better academically. Music boosts creativity in kids, and when they mention the beta and the theta waves, but also the alpha waves. And music makes kids nicer. Those that are involved in music are better team players quite often because they're doing an ensemble type thing with orchestra or band or choir. But even in piano, even in a solo instrument, they're working with a teacher. And also it helps with their growth and development. Learning music enables kids to better express their ideas, accept criticism, and improve their critical thinking and problem solving skills. And as and you could probably go ahead and stop the share now because I'm done with those
And would
pictures.
you mind, can we post those to the Facebook group? And
Sure.
share those things?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and then what I do.
I saw you, Diane, taking pictures. I got you. Go ahead and.
Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, I love seeing pictures of the brain and how everything is just affected by that. And one thing that I am doing with my students to help them, whether they're on the spectrum or not, those that are on the spectrum and have a lot of maybe self-harming or some meltdowns, I work with them to, I use modeling language, meaning that like when they're having a meltdown, I'll say, I can see when every time you make a mistake, you pull and twist your fingers like they're going to come out of their sockets. That tells me you're angry. And for me, anger, I feel that in my heart, feel heat in my heart. Sometimes I feel heat in my face. And I'll ask them, is that what you're feeling? And, over time, we'll get some emotion words gathered, and they are learning how to, if they struggle with articulating emotions in words, this really helps them to be able to do that. But I also go a step further and ask them, what color do you think goes with that emotion? And whatever color they choose, that is fine. They may choose a color that I wouldn't choose, but it has meaning to them. And that's all that matters, because then it solidifies that emotion for them. Then I take it a step farther with their music. And I say, okay, what piece of music are you playing right now that you think expresses anger? And then, or what part of this piece of music we're working on do you feel is angry? So then we'll write that in, or I'll have the student write that in and then color it with a colored pencil, or we like to use those erasable gel pens, because as a teacher, I hate marking up music that can't be erased. So, but that really solidifies that emotion for them. And so then when they are playing, they're playing from a deeper place. It's a much more grounded place. They're playing from some deep, deep place within them, which that's when it's really making a lifelong difference for them and bringing them solace and strength. And then it's so cool, because then when they're communicating, especially at the piano, which piano has no language, verbal, right? But they're still communicating a spiritual and emotional aspect to people who are uplifted and moved, even if they can't articulate why. That doesn't matter. And so those are the things that I do, and that I particularly work with emotion and memory. And I do other things too. I mentioned the modeling and mindfulness to help bring calmness and focus in the lessons, and particularly when they're dealing with a lot of really painful emotions, which can happen with kids on the spectrum or kids that have had other types of trauma and other types of emotional trauma.
And that's one of the things that we had talked about, was just I was sharing with you the Waco research, when the kids had been traumatized and they went into the foster homes and the placement centers, and they had perfect behavior. And because they hadn't, you had talked about was it the limbic system that has no words?
Right.
And so, the theory was that the pain and the trauma was locked in that limbic system. And then as they were able to, and it was pre-words, but if they could dance it out, if they could sing it out, if they could paint it out, and I don't know exactly, I can't say exactly what was happening to Sasha Leah, but to walk into a room that felt traumatic, but was creative, and then to connect with that experience that she had in Hawaii, where she danced her way into freedom and sang her way. You just heard in her story just the layering of all of the arts, and having these powerful experiences in all the arts, and then and with her creator, to find herself and to be released to the fullness of herself. And then having come out of a war zone and then being faced with it, there's a possibility then that a lot of that what was being stored in that limbic system that didn't have words then had expression. She said time and time again about the story, telling the story through dance, telling the story through song and through music, and telling the story through art, that it puts that into the language, and it processes it, and it releases you back into that joy and into that freedom. And creativity sparks creativity.
Mhm.
It just goes to, it doesn't stop. And you can see in the story of her life, it's like one area of creativity branching into another area of creativity, branching into another area of creativity, branching, and just really, tomorrow I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about finding the genius in your child. And I'm going to go into a study that NASA did. NASA hires on purpose 50% of their staff diagnosed with dyslexia. And there's well, I'm not going to go into it. I was like, well, all of a sudden I'm going to talk about it, but I don't want to do that. But just the returning to joy, returning to that place of peace, and returning to discover yourself and all the good in yourself, no matter what's going on in the world, around you. And I love that you then help your students then put that in color, then put that in and into that language part of the brain. So then it's not all of a sudden I'm going to melt down, or all of a sudden it becomes a tool for them when they're triggered, whether it's an emotional trigger or whether it's an on that spectrum trigger of too much light, too much sound, too much motion, interior things that are happening. It helps put that into the language part so that the triggers don't control, but that you can find peace and return to you. And I had a girl, her name was Joy, like Sasha Leah, her name was Joy, and she was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And her mom had, they would do bulletin boards, and they would have a joy box so that when she was feeling triggered or she was not feeling herself, she could return to joy. She could return to her joy box or her joy bulletin board. And I met up with them again, preparing for college. And I had already had, like your proprietary process, your movements and the different things that you do. And, that returning to joy had been part of my proprietary process. And to have someone actually be named Joy and actually return to joy, return to themselves, was such a cool revelation to me. It's like, the difference between putting on a mask and putting on a smile and pretending, and then just driving that stuff deep into the limbic and actually dancing it, drawing it, playing it, until you get to return to yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Love that.
I'm so glad that you guys are here. I'm so glad that I'm really excited for a generation of children to be released into the fullness of who they were created to be, and to be released into joy and to discover the gift of who they are. And we have 4 minutes left on our session. And I'm just checking. Okay, go ahead and raise. I don't know if I have control back again. I did something on Zoom.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So you guys will have to unmute yourselves if you or raise your hand. Did you have any questions for Hemda? Diane, you're unmuted.
I did. Yeah.
Good.
Oops,
You're muted
again.
back up. Unmute again.
Okay, there we go. Yes, I did. When you were talking about the music, did it depend on what kind of music would you have listened to in the classroom? Would it always be classical, or could it be anything that that they enjoyed?
Anything that they enjoy.
Okay.
Now, and when I teach piano, I'm open to teaching classical, but also pop and gospel and Christian.
Okay.
And, What did I miss? I missed something. Blues and jazz.
Right. Okay.
Rock
Country.
and country, yeah.
Yeah. Like, what did
Okay,
I
thank
blank
you.
there?
And
Thank
whatever
you.
we missed, she includes that in
Right,
her.
right. Okay. Thank you so much. That was just amazing. I'm learning so much. I am so excited to be here. I am.
And Hamda, have you seen any of the research on the difference between, or maybe explain your slides on the difference between actually hearing the music and then playing it? And I know that there's going to be a deep connection with then dancing it, because then it becomes movement and it's the whole body, it's the whole spirit, soul, and body.
It's interesting. If you're listening to music, but you have moved to it, for instance, you've done something with it, but you can, that's what I was trying to say. Like, you can actually imagine the music in your head and still have the same sensations in your brain and your body. It's really phenomenal. And I mean, so I think listening, I mean, obviously, if you're moving and you're moving to it, you're going to probably activate more of the motor cortex and in the cerebellum in that respect. But then there's also a sense that even when you're listening to it, your body is responding in some way. I don't know that I've ever seen anyone listen to music without moving. I don't think.
Yeah.
So there's always some response, whether you're listening or you're actually playing or doing something with or singing or dancing.
How exciting is that, because they've done research, we've got so much more on the brain, with as technology has improved, but that there's a positive side. The negative side is that, had you done some intense drugs or whatever, that you get triggered and your brain, it goes back into that same space as if you're doing the drug again. And how exciting to hear today from Hemda that the same thing happens when you're returning to joy, that whatever you're experiencing, you're feeling, that what you're moving, what you're doing, that when you kind of open up and you like relive that in your imagination, that it actually has the same neurological effect. And I'm seeing your picture of your brains and the brain lights up.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Can I have just a very quick question? It's not even a question. I think maybe that's a comment, but how do you just mention that it's not just about like just moving to it, right? But also it starts in your brain, kind of this thing. And I am running this Dance and Thrive challenge journey where I teach women how to start dancing even if they never danced before. And what I teach them all the time, I tell that dancing starts in the mindset. So it's like you give yourself permission to envision, to see yourself, first of all, that you can dance and that you start dancing in your brain. And I never had a scientific proof to that. But what you're saying right now has like a very good confirmation to it, because I don't know, it's just like I'm gonna write this down and do more research on that. Because I came to that part intuitively, and I knew it was just like as if God connected the dots for me, and I kind of felt it for myself. I had the momentums where I could not dance because my physical body was very weak, but I felt as if like in my mindset, in my spirit, my soul was dancing, and the connection, the affects of that joy that would be released would be the very same thing as if I was actually dancing. So do you have anything like in specific that I can just write down as a note, what I can research to read about that a little bit more? Like which part of a brain or?
Do I have any resources for you? Is that what you're asking me
or research? Yeah.
Yeah, like if I have to do more research about that to see the more scientific proof to that, like what would you recommend I can go and like seek out and Google and search,
Oh, that's a really good.
Like maybe which part of a brain is responsible for that, or like where can I start?
You know what? You could Google. I'm sorry, that sounds really uneducated, but you could you could Google some research on. You can find some really amazing things online if you look for it.
Well,
And
what
I
would be
would just
some key words for her to
keywords, yeah, I would put in the brain and let's see, how about visualizing and the brain, or because that's what you're doing, isn't it? Visualizing and the brain. What is the connection between what happens in the brain when we visualize
Mhm.
our dancing,
Okay.
or what
well,
happens yeah.
and there's some stories of some pianists that didn't have an actual keyboard, that just had a piece of cardboard, but it was all in their imagination. But then when they got to an actual keyboard, they could play what they had imagined, what they had created in their imagination.
Yeah, and when I was in college, I had a teacher that told me I needed to visualize. I needed to how practice the piano away from the piano. The first time I tried to do that was very difficult because I'm a very kinesthetic learner, and I'm like, what is he talking about? And but I that actually got better as I worked on it. And so I developed that ability to imagine myself playing, and I would take the music and I would begin to hear it in my head as best as I could, I mean, obviously not exactly in reality, but it made a difference in my practice. And my practice was better because when I practiced away from the piano, I was not repeating bad habits. I was hearing more of an ideal sound that I wanted and creating that. They call it audiation now that I think about it. Being able to hear the sound in your head before you create it. So in a sense, that's not audiation, but it's, I guess, visualization in dancing. But probably also audiation in dancing too, because you have to hear the music.
Yeah, I think
You're activating a lot of parts of your brain, the motor cortex, the cerebellum, and the auditory when you're visualizing dancing, because you're having to hear the music as well. That's what I would
That's
think.
what was happening to me actually, that sometimes I would not even like hear the music. I like actual music. I would just kind of like envision music in my head and then envision myself dancing. And back then I was not even dancing. I was more into music part, but I could not really see myself dancing. I was very clumsy this
Oh,
kind of way. I was not a child that was like born to dance. I developed that as a habit, but I kept seeing that and seeing that and seeing that. And then it's like as if I was practicing that in my brain, giving myself permission to start dancing. And then I started to dance behind the closed doors. And then it started, I think what I was visualizing for quite a while started to be put in practice more like gracefully and with ease, as if I would just start doing it without visualization. And it's very funny that you're actually talking about that, because I was just teaching the whole previous week on the power of envisioning, and we were talking about envisioning overall, like the dreams that we have inside of our inner heart, this kind of stuff. And this envisioning part, when I was doing the research, it just, I don't know, I was like, it was like a very deep thing, and I thought I can do a whole month on that teaching, not a week.
yeah.
So some of the words that you had said, Hemda: visualizing, audiation, and then you had talked about the different parts of the brain, the motor cortex, and what
Yep.
were the other parts?
What I just said just now with visualizing.
Yeah,
Let's see, what did I say? Oh, probably the sensory, because you're also activating that part of the brain that's in the not tactical, tactile, like for piano, but also for movement and dance as well.
thank you very much. Well, we are
Thank you.
past our time. And the reason I asked you, Hemda, is I'm going to drop those words in for further research, and let the women that are in the Facebook group just continue on and research that and share their stories. And I just want to thank you, ladies, and the ladies that had to jump off, for your time. And this has been fascinating. I'm super excited now for this lead into finding your genius, releasing the genius in your child. And I'm super excited about tomorrow, and I will see you tomorrow.
Nice to meet you, Sasha Lisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Nice to meet
Thank
you
you
too.
for sharing.
Bye.
Bye-bye.